My name is Steph Harris, and I'm the commercial director on the carbon markets team here at 3 Degrees. 3 Degrees is a firm that helps organizations achieve renewable energy and decarbonization goals. So our mission is to make it possible for businesses and their customers to take urgent action on climate change. And we do this by providing renewable energy and emission reduction solutions to organizations that want to join the fight against climate change. And our carbon markets team specifically develops and manages carbon offset projects, meaning we are responsible for the monitoring, reporting, and verification, also known as MRV, of carbon projects, which is the process that actually creates the carbon credits. My role specifically is to help manage our portfolio of credits from all of our projects and monetize those credits in the market on behalf of our project partners. Usually this looks like building portfolios for our customers that blend together credits from a number of different projects. A carbon offset represents 1 metric ton of a greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide, methane, that is either avoided, reduced, or removed in order to compensate for emissions made elsewhere. For today's conversation, I think it would be helpful to specifically focus on different types of offset projects that occur at dairy farms. There are a number of different offset projects beyond this, but let's dive into some of the more specific details around what it can look like for dairy farmers. So under a baseline scenario, at most farms, there are no carbon reduction activities, meaning some methane is generated by the cows themselves, and even more comes from the manure. Manure is typically stored in a lagoon, think a big pool, where that waste decomposes anaerobically or without oxygen, and then methane is created as a result, and that's released into the atmosphere. So there are a couple of different ways that farms can implement carbon reduction systems that either reduce or avoid that methane. One example of that is an anaerobic digester system. So that lagoon, that pool is covered, the methane gas is collected and destroyed, meaning it's either flared as carbon dioxide, which has a lower global warming potential than methane, or it's actually used to generate electricity on site, which can be really beneficial for other emission reduction activities at the farm. And then you have other new systems, we're calling them alternative manure management practices that are emerging, such as solid separation or vermicomposting. I get really excited about these. With vermicomposting, the manure is collected and it's sprayed over this biofilm, which consists of wood shavings and earthworms. Yes, worms. And the wood chips collect organic matter for the worms to feed off of, and it actually converts that manure into really nutrient-rich worm castings, and that can be sold as an additional revenue stream for the farm. The remaining liquid drains through and is deposited into the lagoon. And so essentially what happens is those solids are treated aerobically with oxygen, and that eliminates the methane ever being produced. And then the water that's coming from that waste sits in the lagoons until it can actually be reused, recycled for agricultural irrigation on crops on nearby farms. And then the last type of project is solid separation. So manure solids are extracted from the raw manure and they're composted, which leaves fewer solids going into the lagoon. Similar to the vermicompost process, this effectively treats those solids aerobically with oxygen and again, eliminates the production of methane. The resulting wastewater has much less organic matter and it only generates a fraction of the methane compared to the baseline. So under any of these systems, carbon credits, the number of credits created from those projects are calculated by subtracting the total number of metric tons of carbon reduced or avoided from the baseline number of carbon emitted under a business as usual scenario. So first, a project must be registered with an independent standards body, such as Verra or the Climate Action Reserve. These standards bodies create rules and requirements for project eligibility and quality criteria. These entities also act as registries or electronic tracking systems where credits can be issued, transferred, or retired. Most of the voluntary standards are also not-for-profits. And so the project registration process is a forward-looking activity where the project developer says, here's the activity we intend to do and the estimated number of credits we think the project will generate. And then all of this information is compiled into detailed documents, such as a monitoring plan that outlines how is data actually going to be collected from the project. All of those documents are approved and then verified by a third-party auditor and ultimately approved by the standards body. So once the project has been registered or what we call validated, the project will undergo periodic verification. So that retroactively assesses the emissions reductions or removals from the project by saying, okay, here's the activity we actually did and the total number of emission reductions that actually occurred at the project. Again, that is verified by the third-party auditor before being approved by the standards body. Once that's complete, the registry actually issues credits, which are available to be sold into the market. The project will wait some time before going through another verification and credit issuance cycle. And so that was obviously a long, detailed, rigorous process, but that process actually ensures that the credits we're bringing to market have been approved and audited by an accredited third party and have been approved by the standards body and are actually following the rules and guidance laid out by that standard. In issuing credits on a tracking system, transferring the credits or retiring them on behalf of our customers ensures that double counting doesn't occur with any of those credits. So all of those mechanisms help uphold the integrity of the credits that are coming to market and being sold and being retired on behalf of organizations. Yeah, it can be really, really tricky. And there are a lot of differing opinions in the market with no widely accepted standards for quality criteria. So that makes this tough for your average consumer in the market. But as a purchaser of offsets, there are some key criteria that I would recommend considering. So first, confirm that the project is registered with an internationally recognized standards body and is audited by an independent accredited third party. Next, I would consider additionality, which is one of the most important criteria for evaluating carbon projects. Additionality means that a project would not have happened if it wasn't for the carbon market. And it can be assessed in a number of different ways. So regulatory additionality means that projects are not required by law. So a project owner should not get voluntary carbon revenue if they are required to implement that activity. You can also look at a project through financial additionality, meaning a project would not be financially viable without carbon revenue. So if a project could fund this activity on their own, maybe they implement a project and they pay for it and there's a return within a year on that investment, they should not be eligible for carbon credits. A voluntary buyer should not be helping to fund that activity. Another important criteria is quantification and monitoring. So a buyer should understand how rigorous, but still conservative, the process is to quantify the reductions and removals and what data is being collected and used to support that quantification. Another thing we would recommend for buyers to consider is permanence. So permanence refers to the ability for reductions or removals to be reversed, or how inherently permanent are the credits once that reduction or removal has occurred. As a buyer, you wouldn't want to support a project that doesn't have a mechanism in place to address reversals. Luckily, with dairy projects, once the methane is captured and destroyed, that process can't be reversed. Or if you avoid creating the methane in the first place, even better. Co-benefits are project benefits go beyond the greenhouse gas benefits. They can include social benefits, environmental benefits, or health benefits that are really important to surrounding communities or neighborhoods. And it's important for buyers to understand the different aspects of projects they're supporting, so they're actually able to speak to the quality of the emission reductions that they're using to compensate for their own emissions. They can be really confident when telling that story to their customers and marketing those claims in any sort of greenhouse gas reporting that an organization might be doing. Let's go back to our example of projects at dairy farms. In the US, dairy farms are not required by law to capture the methane that is created. They're required to do other, have other environmental regulations that they must comply with. Usually that happens on a state-by-state basis, but no incentive right now to capture that methane and implement any of those activities that I described. Carbon credits provide that financial incentive for a farmer to consider greenhouse gas reduction activities, which under a business as usual scenario, they might not do. And we're starting to see this shift where a farmer might actually be able to sell their milk at a higher price because there's companies that are willing to pay more for that, but other consumers are not. And so setting that standard for what that means for a carbon neutral milk company is starting to shift, and hopefully we can get more companies and consumers on board with that. You have companies like Neutral, just as a result of being a company, you have operations, you have greenhouse gas emissions associated with your business activities. So even once all internal reduction efforts have been implemented, there's still more that you can do. And carbon credits allow a company like Neutral to take urgent action now by supporting and funding projects at dairy farms that might not have done this in the absence of carbon projects, and are in turn able to, Neutral can now claim the benefits of those reductions while simultaneously working on longer term carbon reduction plans, especially as the company is growing. It's hard to know where to go to truly educate yourself on what that means. And so in the past, and still today, carbon credits might be thought of as pay to pollute permits, where buyers of offsets don't actually have to make any changes to their business. I can buy credits, I can say I'm carbon neutral, my business can make some sort of carbon reduction claim, but I didn't have to change my behavior. And that's not what we're going for here. So I just want to be very explicit about that. Best practice is for companies to actually reduce their internal emissions wherever they can, as aggressively and as quickly as possible, and then use offsets to address their remaining footprint. Because for many companies, they don't have direct control over their emissions. And so offsets are that way for companies to take urgent action now while working towards those longer term, more difficult decarbonization strategies. And if customers want to learn more, I would suggest talking to companies like Neutral that are actually implementing reduction projects at the farms that you all work with. And then you're buying offsets to compensate for the rest of your footprint. Or reach out to a group like 3 Degrees. We have a portfolio of projects we manage, and we love helping companies get started on their carbon reduction journeys. The carbon offset and the carbon credit are the same instrument, they're just called different things. And all these nuances are coming up, but really the mechanism, no matter what you call it, is still the same. And the important thing to remember is that carbon credits are not the end-all be-all solution for reducing global greenhouse gas emissions. And every company needs to be taking urgent action today, and carbon offsets are just one piece of that puzzle. right now, achieving a state of net zero means aligning internal reductions with what is needed to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and then neutralizing your residual emissions with carbon removals from projects that are actively sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere instead of just avoiding emissions. These types of projects may include reforestation or tree planting, where the tree wasn't there before, we plant the tree, and now that tree is sequestering carbon. Or new emerging technologies like direct air capture and long-term carbon storage. Think big fans that are able to suck carbon out of the atmosphere and store it underground for thousands of years. So don't get me wrong, we absolutely need to avoid all emissions as quickly as possible. That's why the work that Neutral is doing today is so critical. But the science is telling us that in addition to avoiding emissions, that working with dairy farms, preventing tropical rainforests from being cut down, we also need to start pulling carbon out of the atmosphere in order to avoid the most severe impacts of climate change. On a totally different note, supply chain reductions are a big trend we're seeing in the market. And so that's work that I know Neutral is actively engaged in to support carbon reduction activities at the farms that you work with, where you're also buying your milk. And having that continue to be a trend moving forward, seeing corporations, companies, organizations take more ownership over the emissions in their supply chain and in their larger Scope 3 footprint. So just in general, we are proponents of supporting a diverse portfolio of projects and diversifying investments across a number of different project types. And agricultural or soil projects, soil carbon projects, support farmers that are actually implementing sustainable farming practices that can increase carbon storage in the soil. It's a great opportunity for Neutral moving forward. These types of projects promote practices such as cover crops and no-till that not only prevent carbon loss, just natural erosion and carbon's released into the atmosphere, but they actually increase the carbon storage in the soil. This can improve crop yields and have other benefits like water storage and nutrient retention. And so in addition to methane reduction or avoidance associated with cattle, these types of projects can be part of a larger holistic farming practice that can reduce total on-site emissions at a farm.